Hello, John. Thank you for coming back to the channel. I
Hi,
believe this is
Paul.
episode 20.
Yes.
Um, so we do these shows every 2 weeks, sometimes every 3 weeks. But this is episode 20. I just want to remind the audience, please click the link in this video in the description box. You'll just click the link and it'll take you to John's website, and that way you can sign up for his newsletter, and also you can do a reading, which is something that I did about 4 years ago. And you'll learn a lot about yourself, and it's a good conversation with John. But just make sure that you click the link. We'll remind you to click the link later in the show. But before we start, for the ones that don't know, my aunt passed away from colon cancer. So this is kind of a little bit of a PSA to make sure you get a screening. Don't, just because you're healthy, or you're afraid, just make sure you get those cancer screenings, because they could save your life. My aunt passed away from metastasized colon cancer. So, take a lesson learned from what happened, and make sure you get your screenings done. With that said, thank you again for coming back to the show here, John. This is our 20th episode of this whole kind of series of
Yeah.
covering.
How
You
long has
know,
it been? We've been doing this for over a year.
we started doing these episodes. I think just it was just before. I think it was just before October 7th. I want to say September,
Ah,
around September, or maybe
that's
September
right.
or August, because I think it was like episode 3. Maybe was when the attack on October
Yeah.
7th happened. So it was a little bit before that. So yeah, it's about a year.
Yeah,
With this
yeah.
series.
This is also this is our year,
Yeah. So
roughly our
yeah.
year anniversary.
And I was wondering, I don't know if maybe the audience, when they see this, can chime in the chat box. But I was thinking of actually having all the shows back to back. See, I have 7 channels, and do all the shows back to back, almost like a John Hogue marathon.
Yes.
Because each show is about 2 hours long. All right. So I could, so for 20, for 40 hours straight,
I used to
seven
run 3.5
channels.
miles every 3 times a week, but I know I did 9 miles once, but not a marathon.
There'd probably be a first. So, but
A
it'd be a
huge
first,
bear running
40,
down the
40
road.
hours for 40 hours. But that's something that's been in the back of my mind. But yeah, but we did shows before this
Mhm.
series, about 4 shows or
Oh, yes.
5 shows before this series, during the 2020 crisis, that we did, in 2020, 2021, 2022. But okay, so um, well, this is episode 2020. There's a lot going on with Coast to Coast and your relationship with them. There's Trump. There's the long range missiles called Storm Shadow and the ATACMS, and I believe there's
And the
also a French.
JASMs.
That's the French version.
Well, that's a scalp.
The Scout. Okay.
But there's also I'm forgive me if I'm getting the acronym wrong, but there's far longer range missiles, American missiles called JASMs. And they look similar, but they have the Storm Shadow and the Scalps don't have that long a range, 300, maybe 400 kilometers. But the JASMs, if they go in, they can go over 1,000 kilometers. They can hit Moscow, they can hit Volgograd, they can hit St. Petersburg, they can hit, and of course, fortunately today, this weekend, actually, when Friday was ending, it really looked like, oh my God, are they really that dumb in the Western leadership circles? Have they talked themselves into a thermonuclear war with Russia? Because, finally, and I remember seeing Vladimir Putin was being interviewed by one of his favorite, a younger interviewer that he does really good interviews with. And they're out in the street taking a break probably from the things that were going on in St. Petersburg. And it's right near that beautiful golden yellow painted arch. And then you see the Neva River beyond it and all that, or possibly the Winter Palace, sorry. So it's a beautiful place, and he's sitting there and he's listening to the guy, and the guy asks great questions, and that's when he laid it down. That he basically said, "Look, we've been there comes a point when the bluff we're not bluffing, but the West constantly think, oh, they're bluffing, oh, they're bluffing, and then there's going to come a time when they're not." And he was basically saying, you can't guide these. Ukrainians aren't guiding and directing and commanding and situationing those targets. It's the British, the French, and the Americans if they put the JASMs in. And so he's saying, look, it's a very thin film that this thing is. You've been fighting using Ukrainians to get killed for your fight with us, and we all know it. This is a war. The Russians have known this is a war of NATO against them, with the very same things openly said that you will not hear in your Western media. So if you're just watching Western media, you literally are being set up to fulfill Stormberger's famous prophecy about the Third World War from the 1790s. With open eyes shall they walk into these catastrophes. And in one day, actually, some people calculate. I'm reading a book, very interesting book about Third World War, written by well, let's see, where is it? Well, it's over there. Anyway, that the whole war could last 71 minutes, just 71 minutes, and that's done. And 3/4 of the human race is dead, or 2/3, and then most of them will die from famine. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. The Russians don't bluff, folks, and I pray that our leaders who are whistling in their own graveyard when they think they are just bluffing will have a moment of clarity. Now, I saw something hopeful that happened over the weekend, but it equally is a pattern that looks like, oh, the West is not going to be that dumb, and they back off. But in all the other ways that they've said, starting early on with Biden, when this NATO proxy war began to get involved in this civil war that's been going on since 2014 between neo-Nazis, well, they're not neo, they're old school Nazis, who have taken over Ukraine with United States help through a coup that overthrew the last elected, democratically elected president of Ukraine, Yanukovych. And CIA was involved, the State Department was involved, Obama's State Department. Victoria Nuland is the architect of this, and she has had a prominent role in the Biden administration until she was dismissed for going a little too far. At which she may have had something to do with the work that ended up with that big mass terrorist attack in Moscow theater that happened earlier this year. And then she was fired after that. That was the big surprise she was talking about just before she was dismissed. And but she's back now in the press, spewing with a little smirky smile, you know, and very, very freewheeling with the truth. I mean, there's a very good thing that Scott Ritter just did, a fact check thing, responding to each of her statements when she had this interview with this pro-American Russian journalist. And so what happened is Putin basically said, with very cool, rational look, he wasn't crazy, he was just, this is what you do. If you cross this line, we are then at war with you, with NATO and the United States, he said. If you start shooting long-range missiles, then we will shoot our long-range missiles into Europe, into targets all around the world of American base. He didn't specify these things, but this is what could happen. And, it kind of chased it home. Another thing that happened today, or around today, a hypersonic missile hit the international airport in the center of Israel, fired from Yemen. So the Iranians, the Putin already said, look, with all the way you literally have thousands of Ukrainian troops pretending to be Ukrainian troops from NATO. And, I see this daily in the real news and on X, you get to see all these people that are, I mean, there's thousands of troops intermixed from NATO. There's a lot of officers running things. A lot of the artillery is being guided by NATO officers. And frankly, I think no one's talking about how many, but just after 2.5 years of this, when I calculate all the news of bunkers full of NATO officers being blown to smithereens, or that training camp in the beginning of the war where the first Kinjal was tested and just wiped out the camp, and like 500 NATO people and NATO sheep-dipped mercenaries. That's in military terms, is where you come in with a NATO uniform, they dip you, sheep dip, now you look like a Ukrainian, but you're not. So um, there's I mean, almost everything that the Ukrainian army has been trained by NATO. They're literally a NATO unit in reality, if not officially. And so Russia has been very patient with this. And people wonder, why are the Russians so patient? Why are they not spouting off and going extreme like us? Well, here's the thing, and we're all alive. We're all alive since 2014 because of this. The Russians are mature people. They recognize that the leadership of the West, they don't hate the Western people, but they recognize, and I would say they are correct, that the leadership in the West is full of lunatics, people who are talking themselves openly into fighting a major war with Russia, and even now, when NATO has literally squandered all its strategic reserves, are now laying in ruins on the battlefields of Ukraine. They don't have the weapons to fight this war. They literally set themselves up to have one option: tactical nukes. Because NATO can't fight with this vast, new, well-trained, and seasoned, victorious Russian army. There's close to 800,000 Russians. They started this war with 40,000 Russians going in. And even with 40,000 Russians, they ended up taking out a lot of Ukrainian units surrounding Kiev. And their goal at that time was to force a rapid move to negotiation. So that was the golden moment to negotiate. It happened, 24th of February. By March, there were already Ukrainian diplomats and Russian diplomats in Istanbul working out a solution, a diplomatic solution. I don't know if you watch the mainstream news, you probably don't even know that happened, or that there was a diplomatic move by several all the way down by the Russians, Minsk 1, Minsk 2, that was trying to resolve. The Russians have been trying to avoid this war for years, but the West keeps marching up to their borders, provoking. And finally, the bear had enough. And the simple thing that has to happen, which was agreed in this agreement, which was going to be signed, ironically, on April 1st. And the agreement was there's one thing the Russians need, and this World War III danger is over. That Ukraine cannot be a member of NATO. But the Allies, it's like they'd rather go to war to make sure that NATO is Ukrainian. And the reason why is as easy to understand as if you were in 1962, October, and you discover that the Soviet Union has placed in Cuba, their ally, right up against your southern coast, 90 miles off the coast, enough nukes that in 5 minutes could wipe out and decapitate Washington, D.C. and every major city except Seattle. And then it was later discovered they could take Seattle out too. You're looking at least, for the nukes of that day, the potential of 20 million Americans in 5 minutes being incinerated. That is exactly the situation that having Ukraine becoming a NATO member would do to Russia. They would then have the ability to put their missiles right. Ukraine's used to be a vast part of Russia, but if it's part of NATO, you're only a few hundred miles from Moscow. So if they launch, the guys watching in Moscow will not know if it's a decapitation move or a mistake or a glitch in the radar. There's not enough time. So what do? Launch everything. That is narrowed options, narrowed time, and made this situation exceedingly dangerous for the future of human race. And so when this happened at the beginning of the weekend, it was like, oh my God, here it comes. Maybe even before October, it's coming. I've been predicting a while now. I thought it might be 2023 or 2022, but I had this weird irony vision that we will have an October missile crisis like 1962. And now it's all lining up to be 2024. The Cuban Missile Crisis meet the Ukrainian missile crisis, the NATO-Ukrainian missile crisis of the coming month. Now, some hopeful things. We'll get back to this idea where there's this pattern that the Western leaders have done consistently, where they'll go, it started with, oh, we're going to send helmets for the Ukrainian army. Oh, no, we're not going to do that. Then we're getting involved. And that could end up in World War III. So now we're sending ammunition and guns, handheld guns. Oh, no, we're not going to do that. And then they do later on. Or there's this point where, oh, we can't send a single German tank or NATO tanks. They'll think it's NATO. And well, they went through that too. And then they do it. And then it's like, oh, we can't have Storm Shadows and Taurus missiles, the German Taurus missiles, which would have a little longer range. They're still not in it yet, but they're probably going to get into it because the pattern is these people say, no, we're not going to do it. Okay. They are that idiotic. They don't seem to have a long-term memory. There was one point when the missiles were considered that President Biden, I heard him say, he says, well, you can't do that. We'll be in nuclear war. And, but, he went down in a coup d'etat, a palace coup. The fundraisers who control the demographic party, that's what I call it these days because of the attempt to use illegal aliens to stuff the ballots. So they're trying to demographically make sure there's only one party in the United States, just like the Soviet Union. It's a one-party system. And just like the Soviet Union, I used to watch documentaries where the Soviets were saying, oh, all our people go and vote. It's a democracy. And they have one party they can choose from, and they can pick and choose any of the people on that ballot. And of course, they don't say that there's only them on the ballot, and they're the ones you can only choose because it's one party system. So you choose, yes, you choose, but if there's no other party competing, it's just a show, it's just a sham to look democratic. Well, we're heading towards that, but that's of course I will get to that. So we had another moment where they backed off with these missiles. The United States decided, no, we can't. It was not the United States. It's something I've been saying before, other rational people, not just the Russians and the Chinese and all, but the rational people that are left in the US government are a very thin line of military officers in the Pentagon. I don't know who they are, but they seem to have, they're talking the truth to power. And, they're the people that would have to push these buttons, and they're saying, no, don't go there. Don't go there. They are right. They have a right, then they will respond. And then we're in a quick escalation to conventional missiles to tactical nuclear missiles. The Russians have very much more powerful low-yield tacticals. I mean, these people are going to throw maybe a 5 or 10 kiloton or 100 or a 20 kiloton Hiroshima-size tactical nuke, low-yield radiation. The Russians' smallest tactical nuke is 75 kilotons. It's like 10, like 10 Hiroshima bombs in one. It's pretty big. So they're not even thinking about these things. So the, the British were all in. The British are even crazier than the Americans in this. And get back to the other theme I left hanging there waving at me, is that when it looked like, and literally the people, it's been admitted by the people on the Ukrainian side that they literally were starting to pour the champagne, that they got the agreement. Russia pulled their troops back from Kiev. They weren't defeated. And rightfully the Ukrainians asked for some action in good faith that would tell them that the Russians meant business and they were going to end the conflict rather than suddenly sign it and then go into Kiev. And the Russians said, yeah, that's fair. That's fair enough. So they pulled their troops away from being around Kiev and out of Sumy and back into Belarusia. They pulled them all out. What happened is that suddenly Zelensky was getting all the Western leaders, the French, the German leader, the Americans, the British were saying, if you go and do this agreement, we're out. You're alone. We'll pull out. We won't give you any weapons, anything. You're done. Now, Victoria Nuland made this lie today where she said there was a little clause in Putin's agreement that the people, and she named the clause, and she's saying, well, there is this clause they had. And of course, this clause was where, they're going to have they're going to like demilitarize, they're not going to have an army and all that. Well, they read the clause, Miss Newland, and they still agreed to it. It's part of the clauses. That was what they were doing. The idea was we don't want to be threatened by you being part of NATO, and we're not going to threaten you. This is all about, we don't want to be occupying and get the burden of Ukraine. We're only doing it because if you can't come to an agreement with us, then we will have to roll into all of Ukraine, and we don't want to. And because, that's what the Americans want them to do. Oh, yeah, let them roll in. Who cares about the Ukrainians? We don't care about them. They're just our cannon fodder. Let's see them get in there, and then we'll start some insurrection, and then they'll be all bogged down in the Ukraine. So, I mean, if the Ukrainian people knew how little respect and love they have for Ukrainian people, they are literally ready to sacrifice Ukraine. And even, the senator from South Carolina openly says it, to the last Ukrainian. Oh, yes, we'll go to the last Ukrainian. Openly. How mad is that? And Lloyd Austin, the rather thick Pentagon chief, I remember he said, "What do you want to do?" And he said, "Well, what we want to do is we want to hurt the Russians. Have this big, long, projected war in Ukraine and to hurt the Russians to the point where their government will fall." Not thinking what that will mean if the country breaks up as the biggest nuclear power. Well, one thing, Russia will never let it go that far. If there's a decapitation, or if there's that's part of their doctrine. If you're out there to break up the country, they'll nuke you. because it's the existence of their nation at stake. Just like John Kennedy was trying to explain to Khrushchev and the Soviet Politburo that when you put these missiles where they can, few minutes, incinerate the leadership, break up our country, kill 20 million people in 5 minutes. Well, we're going to take, if you can't pull these missiles out or won't, we will take Cuba. And they were setting up for a major naval invasion and then major airstrikes. And, they would put Cuba back into the Stone Age. But the danger of that, if it got to fighting, is they didn't know. In fact, even a lot of the Soviet command didn't know that some of the battalion-sized Soviet forces, about 5,000 on the island at that time, I think it was 5 or 10,000, that they had these frog, I think it's frog tactical nukes. And the people on the ground had, which is odd for the Soviet centralized command, had the option they could use them if the Americans were invading. So they would have launched tactical nuclear weapons on the US Navy off the shore, melting the ships, obliterating the boats of Marines coming in and all that. And then Soviet Union would have hit Berlin and taken it back. And then this would escalate. They fire their missiles, as Kennedy said, we fire ours. We fire ours. And then you have the Guns of August, as they said, because they had all read Barbara Tucham's, I'm murdering her name, sorry, Barbara Tusham, I think. Her Guns of August. Kennedy that history book probably saved the world because it was, Kennedy had all of his cabinet read it as a must read. It must have had some prescience or something. Certainly, he was anticipating the potential of crises all the time in the early part of the Cold War. But they all read it. And it's a story about how all these, I think, in a lot of ways, all these leaders of the West in Europe, they all had these treaties that were supposed to prevent the war, but they actually were tripwires that ended up pulling everybody in Europe into this war. And so the war nobody wanted to fight. The Kaiser never wanted to fight World War I. The Brits didn't want to fight it. The Russians didn't want to fight it. The French didn't want to fight it. But they had made such a nest of tripwires to kind of prevent or scare people off from doing this. That back then there were no nukes, so the nukes scare are much better because if they're launched, well, at least in the first Cold War, everybody understood that meant everyone's destruction, mutually assured destruction. MAD was what it's called. But we have forgotten MAD. Our leaders have forgotten MAD. Our press is not helping you to remember the context of MAD and the fact that even though we reduced our nuclear weapons, all we've done is shaved off a few times over we can kill the human race. But there is more than enough nuclear weapons to set in motion the same thing in our times with a lot less. Because what we've discovered is these weapons actually will burn whole areas, not just to burn a city like New York, but maybe 500 square miles will be on fire. And all of that is going to go up into the atmosphere, into the stratosphere, and block out the sun, maybe for a year or two. And that's why the vast majority of people in nuclear war who don't die from radiation, they don't die from blasts, they die from starvation because our food system will completely break down. And maybe only Australia and New Zealand will be able to keep growing crops, but the rest of us will not for years. And there will be a great dying off of people, mostly from that. So it's just, I wish I need not have to talk about this, but there is a very positive moment in life when being afraid is not a bad thing. Being afraid of sticking your hand in fire is not unhealthy. It is healthy. It is, going out of your car to pet the lion in Africa is no, have healthy fear. We have lost our fear. We're like children who want to play with nuclear fire. Oh, that's pretty. Ah, you know. So be afraid. Be afraid like I was afraid, and my brother and my mom and dad and the rest of the United States next to our transistor radios, listening blow by blow of where was the embargo, the quarantine, were the Soviet subs with their ships with more missiles going to cross it, and was somebody going to fire on somebody? And then every night, our news was only 30 minutes at night. The world news, everybody was watching across the United States, and we were afraid. And the fear went deep, so deep that we held from generation to generation that fear of mutually assured destruction. And in a way, it's because of the Cuban Missile Crisis bringing attention to us that later led to the peace treaties and armaments treaties that took the nuclear threat away. But then when the Cold War ended and the Russians were, we thought, defeated, that's not what happened. The Russians decided not to fight anymore because it was exhausting their economy. They defeated themselves by trying to too rapidly go into free market systems in one extreme move, and it was a complete disaster. Gorbachev was a well-meaning leader, but he was an idiot. He almost, there may have even killed as many, maybe 10 million Russians died because when everything was privatized, all the people that were on their retirement funds, um, they had no money, so they couldn't eat. A lot of them committed suicide. There were even gangs that went around in Russia, and they would find people and they just kill them and take the property and then privatize it. It was a mess in Russia. It was a very bad mess. And the time of troubles, it's called, or the second time of troubles, the other one was in the 1300s. But Russia came out of that, but they had to kick out the Americans and their enablers, the Russian oligarchs. And the Americans was, I'll never forget the time I was coming back from some film shoot I did somewhere in the United States, and I was in the island shuttle coming back to my island, and I figured out I was ending up talking to a major NGO, and she was livid, absolutely livid, hated Putin for what he did. He kicked us all out, and we're trying to make everything free and all that. And I realized, I researched it. No, they were carpetbaggers. She was a carpetbagger. She was going in to exploit Russia when it's down on the ground, and take something out of the pockets, take some money and stuff like this. These NGOs were privatizing Russia for their own profit so that they could do what they always want to do. Maybe they don't need to break up Russia anymore. They can grab all those amazing resources that a country that's 1/6 the size of the surface parts of the earth, the largest country in the world, with all kinds of incredible um, um, resources. And that's why people from the West have always been trying to take Russia down. And this time they were trying really to do it. But at last, Napoleon couldn't do it. Hitler couldn't do it. NATO wasn't yet advancing because they promised not to. But basically, the man that came onto the scene who didn't want to be the president, but Yeltsin, who couldn't run the country anymore, he was in his cabinet, Putin, and he brought him in the office and said, Vladimir Vladimirovich, you've got to take over this job. But he said, I'm not ready for it. Putin was like, okay. He wasn't this power hungry guy. He was shocked. He said, but I'm not ready yet. I can't do this. And he said, you have to, because you're the only honest man I've got. Even my family members in this grift cabinet of mine, I wouldn't trust them as far as I can throw them. And so, Yeltsin's one of those classic Dostoevsky characters where he's a drunk and he's got a lot of faults, but he had his moments of bravery and he had his moments of clarity. And it was one of the greatest moments of clarity for the sake of Russia. He knew something even Putin didn't know, that this guy could fix it. It took a long time. But now Russia is resurrected from all that terror and exploitation by American MGOs, and it is now risen again as a major power. It has an industrial base that we have lost. It has a much larger industrial base than we do, and it's amazing how it's recovered. And if you look at Russia through alternative media eyes, it's not propaganda, it's objective. Don't believe me or disbelieve me, but just put aside all your CNNs and your, I mean, in a way, excuse me. I mean, if you're watching us now, you're beyond that now. But there may be new people amongst you watching this. So I'm not talking to the core audience. I'm talking to those people who might have stumbled into Paul Cottrell's shows, and just for them, I'm saying, look, don't believe what I'm saying. Blinding believing is the problem. Test what I'm saying. Keep watching your mainstream news, your Fox, your CNN, your CBS, whatnot, and MSNBC and all that. Go ahead. I watch it. I haven't stopped. My job is to watch all the news. But come into through like what reading my Hogue prophecy reports or something like that. If you come into there, I share all my sources so that you can check them out, and then you can check their sources out and their sources out. And what you will discover, and with some time, you will see over time that one side is getting it pretty right, and the other side is consistently loading up a lot of BS. And it's shocking to say, I wouldn't even believe it myself if I hadn't seen alternative media. That's why they're trying to ban RT. RT hasn't done anything like they're blaming them right now. RT is actually reporting news. Oh no, you can't report news. They're pulling this Russiagate thing again. It's so boring and it's so ridiculous. So RT is being sanctioned mainly because they do journalism, and the Americans that have worked with them do journalism. Yeah, but don't believe me, just go and check it out. RT.com is still they're not able to cancel it out, so just type in rt.com and watch for yourself and take a little time to check it out. Give it a little time, and you will see that it's very good news. It's very accurate. And they're not hiding the fact, just like BBC doesn't hide the fact, or Voice of America doesn't hide the fact, that we're giving you a Russian look at the world. Vladimir Putin said that what we need in the world is a voice that is not dominated by Anglo-Saxon points of view. So Al Jazeera is another good one. That's Arab points of view. There's Global News, I think it's called. If you want to know what the Chinese worldview is. And this is the way, don't be afraid of looking at other people's worldviews, but definitely be very aware and very on guard about American news telling you what the other people do and think. Now maybe, if you think I'm a propagandist, test it. If you think I'm not working for Russia, test it. One of the things that makes me so accurate in my forecasts, so I contend, is that I am following trends in the future based on sources that are consistently accurate. And it's just like what Salenti does with the Trends Journal. Very good magazine, by the way. I highly recommend it. He does exactly the same thing. He's very successful at it because he has good sources to balance the intuition. So I've got a lot of angles here flying around, so I will come back to the missiles. The missiles, so we had this experience where the Americans choked. The bully Americans choked. They went, I mean, we really gonna, because this time, it's very hopeful. This time they started listening to Putin when he said this before, but this time it kind of stuck. And so they kind of went, well, I don't know. So the Americans bugged out. The British government is furious. Starner's, the Prime Minister Starner's government was, I would guess it was a lot of hot words on Saturday about all this. And on the press conference, there was also that. And Biden was a bit ornery old man as well. And what was pissing everybody off was that the British really wanted to launch their missiles. My God. Um, so, but there's this pattern, as I said before. Everything they say, no, they'll never do. Give them time. They do it. They escalate. So what would be the next milestone, that the next new abnormal that would shock them and panic them to do it? Well, I think that's coming in October. I think it is. What's happening is that Ukraine is beginning to unravel. The Ukrainian army is really falling apart. It is now a slow moving avalanche. It's not a few pebbles. This is the way war of attrition goes. It takes, I've said before, you have the Richmond Petersburg line at the end of the Civil War of the United States, 35-mile entrenchment of the Army of North Virginia, with a much larger army of Grant trying to extend the trench line farther and farther until the Confederates were too thinned out to hold the line, even though it was dug in with picks everywhere and stuff. And so didn't have barbed wire then. Uh, and then when it broke, it took 9 months and 2 weeks of holding, looking like nothing was happening, except a lot of people were dying on both sides of the line. And then suddenly, within 3 days, the whole line collapsed. And something like that is usually what happens in such a war of attrition that we're seeing, and it's beginning to collapse. But as we get into October, it will. I think it'll be full on. I hope that even the leaders in the West will have to finally admit that Ukraine's not only in trouble, Ukraine has lost. Give it up. Let the Russians have their terms. And because they don't want the rest of Ukraine, but they are ready to go all the way to the Polish border and the Romanian border if they must. But it's get away with losing Odessa and everything east of the Dnieper River is probably going to be asked for, because that used to be all part of Russia. Ukraine is this artificial country that was created by Lenin. One of the biggest mistakes Lenin ever made. And Putin, is the guy talks about it, really rails at Lenin, the so-called communist president of New Russia, who is actually a capitalist, not a communist, and he is a Russian Orthodox Christian, and also an eighth degree judo master. So, all this talk about him being Stalin and all that. Well, they just hope that you don't check facts. Like so many sheeple in the world don't. They just go on with their sheeple lives, and also just people. I got my own life to live, and this is all overwhelming. So that's the way these, to be fair to the sheeple I'm calling sheeple, is, people, we don't have governments that think about us. We have governments in the West that want to act like aristocracies, and we're the peasants. The overlords of us want us to be overwhelmed. So, in our democracy, when it was still working, there was care about what was happening with people. I mean, why are they sending all these hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine, a lost cause, before it even started this war, when we need those hundreds of billions of dollars to deal with our own needs here in our country, our own people? And that's all been forgotten, because this country has been under a deep addiction in two ways, two industrial complexes: the SIC, the Sickness Industrial Complex, and the MIC, the Military Industrial Complex. And if you're addicted to war, it makes the most money and power for you. You're not a friend of peace. That's bad for business. So there's this, even when we're dealing with reaching a point of nuclear clashes, which would end the military industrial complex, not a good business move. There's this whole programming of our leadership that they just want to keep going. They want to advance and make more money and do this, and talking themselves into, oh, the Russians won't do that, but that's very dangerous. So what's going to happen is the scenario is always the one that I've written a lot about this war, and since it started, actually even before it, that the danger is that if the Allies panic when the Ukrainian army is running to the Dnieper River, when the line is breaking, and they're desperately, the survivors are trying to get over that big river, and the Russians are advancing now 20 miles a day, not, a mile a day, but now 20 miles a day, 30 miles a day. When it suddenly becomes fluid and they're chasing the Ukrainians and they're surrendering in droves. And the other thing that's concerning me is that, this could have been negotiated, but because it was negotiated, and because then the European allies came in and pressured Zelensky to rip off that April 1st, it became an April Fool, that treaty, which could have ended the war in 6 weeks. And all of these people have died in Ukraine. All the infrastructure of Ukraine has been destroyed for military reasons, prevent troops from Ukraine getting easily around the front and all of that. But of course, it has a civilian consequence. And it may very well be that the power grid is now so teetering on complete collapse that it may collapse as winter comes. And then nobody is going to be able, in a cold Ukrainian river or Ukrainian um, um, apartment. There's a lot of high rises in Ukraine. It's going to get too cold. So millions and millions of all those who haven't left already are going to leave Ukraine. Ukraine's going to be empty, sufficiently empty to not be able to really exist as a functional nation. So it's over. It's over. I don't want to see that happen, but it's the Russians have always been willing to negotiate, but it's got to be real negotiations. You don't have this comic come up and say, well, here's how we start this negotiation. Even though you're winning and taking all this territory, we won't talk to you unless you abandon all that territory and give back the Donbass and give back Crimea from 2014. Then we'll deal with you. I mean, that's an idiot talking as if he thinks he's winning this war. But when you're losing a war, it's lucky if you get good terms from, you fought, you played the proxy of NATO, and now you're really coming close to dying to the last Ukrainian soldier. And rather than turn on the West, which has just been exploiting Ukrainians, they don't give a damn about Ukraine. They're just cannon fodder to get their goals to take down Russia, but Russia has gotten stronger. Its economy has gotten stronger. Its army is now, the most powerful, seasoned, and experienced army on the planet right now. And NATO hasn't been in a real war, well, since World War II, a big European war. Uh, so, and like I said, they've given all the hardware that the military industrial complex makes, which is not purposeful, but profitable. And everybody in the world has seen that all our great weapons, when they're in a real war, break down, they don't work, and they're pathetic on the battlefield. These tanks, these Abram tanks, the Challenger British tanks, the German Leopard tanks, they just burn real good. They're terrible. You look at the Russian gear, it works. It's purpose related. It's not profit, because the military industrial complex want to make sure that they build things that have too many more things they got to do all at once, like even wipe your face or something like that while you're shooting, turn on the radio, and too many functions all in one, like our F 35s, and a only a 1/4 of them at any time are actually functional. The other 3/4 are in various repair and problems. So, when you build all these very expensive jets and only 1/4 of them are functional, there's something wrong with your military industrial complex. There are people corruptly making a lot of money, and you don't have proper defense. So these are the real issues to look at, and maybe what's going to happen is that I hope that the leaders of the West are actually bully wimps. It's I'm hopeful for what happened this weekend that's going to happen. They're going to choke when it comes really down to thinking about launching a tactical nuke. They're going to choke. They're going to get a little nervous and realize, well, maybe that's the end of me. And since I'm a bully wimp, I'm really a coward. And maybe the coward will wisely step in and pull the shaking hands away from the doomsday button. That's possible. I'm rooting for that future, but we'll see. Because they're going to be in a place they've never been before, losing NATO's whole credibility. Stoltenberg doesn't say too many things right before he left as head secretary, general secretary of NATO, but before he throttled his way off the stage, um, he did say something true. Says if Ukraine loses, NATO loses. That's true. And I would even say NATO may even break up. So, so here you have this whole the astrologically speaking, I've said this before about the 7 times that Pluto in its position when America was born. We've since 2021 up to October, the coming month, Pluto has moved forward and backwards on its natal position in Capricorn at the U.S. birth in 1776. So our whole history, our whole life cycle has been one orbit of Pluto, the United States of America. And now, because Pluto has returned and now is moving, it'll move. This is the last time in the 3rd week of October is when Pluto will have touched its natal position, and then it's not going to do it again for 248 years. So what then is beginning is Pluto is going to soon start moving into Aquarius. And what happened with the American Revolution, as apparently happened when Pluto was in Capricorn, when Jesus was teaching, that the seed of a new religion, the architecture, the theory, just like the Bill of Rights or just like Jesus's 3 years of missionary work, laid out the dream, laid out because even for America, they had the dream, they had the Constitution, but they had to now live it. And that happened for them. It happened the year after 1776 when this Pluto returned to Capricorn. It was at, I think, 29 degrees Capricorn, right? And so it immediately afterwards went into Aquarius, and actually most in 1777. And most of the real fighting for the revolution in America happened then. What happens is theory becomes practice. So what happened, the 2 key revolutions that set in motion modern democracy in our history, the first was the concept, the visionary, the Capricorn Pluto, which is the ruler of great ages, generational regenerations and degeneration ages. The the reality, the architecture was set, but it was, in this case, 15 years later, because astrology doesn't always follow a pattern and changes and stuff. It was then, about 15 years later, I think, that in 1789, 14th of July, the Bastille was taken by the French people, and it launched the French Revolution. the French Revolution put in action the, the spread of revolutions all over the world. The American Revolution being far removed from the center of world powers and stuff, with two vast oceans be to protect it, so it could slowly grow without having a. None of our neighbors were big powers. We were the big power, so we that has its bad sides too. But the good side is that we didn't have like Britain right on our border, Russia right on our border, like happens in Europe. But France had them all on its border, and it ended up having to fight a lot of the French Revolutionary Wars, and then followed by the Napoleonic Wars. So they were fighting from 1792 or 1793 until 1815 with these wars. But what had happened is to defeat the revolutionary, they couldn't defeat the revolutionary French citizen armies. It was something never seen before. Armies were professional armies with crowned heads, and they had their certain rules and orders of doing proper gentlemanly fighting. But these were the whole nation mobilized. Never national mobilizations had never happened until then. And so, but then that became the Napoleonic Empire, and Napoleon, though he was a dictator and the first modern fascist nation in European history was Napoleon's empire, first empire. But he even cut his hair short because he kind of looked like a Caesar, so he had his long locks when he was the revolutionary, the hippie, the warrior hippie, But it's a funny thing. You'll notice it that when fascism is in power, people cut off the beards, people shorten the ladies' hair, and the men are cropped. That's where you get skinheads, and stuff. But then there's parts where it's more liberal and the beards are longer, the women's hair grows much longer. And so there's an interesting, I should write an article, kind of a funny article about the history of haircuts and how they tell us something about what political general stance things are in. So anyway, so although he was a kind of enlightenment kind of dictator, oxymoron, but it has some possibilities, trying to be a good plutocrat. Um, the only way you could defeat Napoleon and his armies is to mimic his ideas of military structure, rebuilding armies. And so, but what they were doing and doing government like Napoleon. So, but what they were doing was that they were actually taking on the French revolutionary ideas into their populaces. And so that they could never expunge from the defeat of Napoleon. And that led to all kinds of revolutions down the next century. 1830, 1849, the European Spring, where all of Europe had revolutions. The Commune of Paris, the Greeks fighting, the Poles fighting for their independence. And then finally it ended up in the 20th century with other major revolutions, the Russian Revolution and the Chinese Revolution, which were huge in impacting things. So from there all the way to 1950 had been all kinds of revolutions, and that spread what, for better and worse, what the Americans had conceived as their dream. It ended up being a dream and nightmare in other revolutions, and it only becomes a nightmare here um, if we succumb to believing what the powers that be, the corporations, the money changers who literally took money away from Biden's campaign. That's why he had to quit. They literally froze his assets so he couldn't run. They said, we're only going to give these to Kamala. So, even the president of the United States had no power. These people, the deep state, these people that are not elected by us, the new corporate fascist aristocracy, which I've been warning about since 1990, was going to really come forth in the 2020s. Well, here we are. And many of the things that I've predicted, and it's in print, it's in my 52 books, it's in my thousands of articles, it's all documented. If people want to study it, you'll find that my accuracy rate is around 80 to 85%, which is very good. because there's things change with the future. 100% accuracy on everything is always bogus. I mean, that's why I looked at all these 75 papal prophecies attributed to the Irish saint Malachi from 1138. I was very suspicious when I wrote The Last Pope, which I'm renewing now, updating. That was one of my most successful books. It made me #1 in Amazon for several weeks, as did my the Complete Prophecies of Nostradamus, or Nostradamus: The Complete Prophecies, that came on after 911. I was also several weeks on the #1 book from that. So I've been in that rare cadre of authors for a bit. But what happened? Let's see, I lost my thread. The papal prophecies were discovered in the mid 1590s, and these prophecies attributed to Saint Malachi. But when I saw that all the main ways you could predict them in the Latin mottos to name either the Pope or a main figure that was against the Pope, or a thing the Pope did, or his Christian name, or his papal name, etc., it's 100%. So I went, no, this can't be. This has got to be somebody writing in the late 1500s who now will see, because there's 35 mottos after this thing emerges, sandwiched in a book by and they see it, and so it is. So I looked at the 36 papal names left. They're 90%. First few were a little wobbly, but as they go farther into our times and into the 21st century, they're even more accurate. Shockingly accurate. I don't know who this person was. It wasn't Nostradamus. All the patterns of his work show it wasn't him. I don't know who he was, but he was a damn good prophet, because it is possible to be 85, 95% sometimes on things, but to be that, the majority of them were like that. So he hid behind the name of Malachi. He didn't need his ego to be petted for doing this. And probably because he was probably in the church, if they knew who he was, he probably would have been burnt. So, but he needed to get his prophecies out, so he hitched them onto an already famous Irish prophet. And so I'm the only, and now a lot of the books are saying that. Nobody seems to attribute the fact that I actually was the first one who discovered this in 1998, but that's okay. I'm just glad the knowledge got out there. And so these are the things I was looking at, and I was looking forward, actually, as far back as I think it was far back in sorry, I'm dealing with century changes things. I'm going to old bad habits of saying 19 rather than 20. I'm dyslexic. Back in 2023, I started to have a very strong premonition. I think it was in October. Well, no, it probably was, no, it was in May of 2023. And so I had, I've been consistently on Coast to Coast AM since 1994. 10 years of Art Bell, 20 years with George Noory. And this thing we do, it's a good thing. They always ask, this is common, it happens in a lot of where you list the things you want to talk about. And sometimes you even kind of make it almost like a script, so that you can so the host can kind of look at the stuff, and kind of, as the show goes, it flows a certain way. It doesn't flow the way the script does. So you pull that one, you mark that one off, and you do another one, you mark that one. It's all fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And for 30 years plus, I have been scripting these shows with talking points with no problems. Controversy was not a problem. It's what made Coast great. at least my involvement with it. But then I was really, I have a show finally on, but I'll get to that. But the things that I wanted to talk about Thursday when I'm on Coast were things I wanted to talk about back in May of 2023. Uh, and it's some of the things I'm sharing with you now is the dangers of October 2024, the reckoning of this, where the defeat is what will NATO do when it's in an uncharted water, where it's lost. Its proxy was defeated, and so was it and America. What are they going to do? How will they handle? Will they have a breakdown and launch and go crazy and do stupid things? Will they suddenly start putting all caution aside and trying to do something to get out of the hole of defeat, do something rash? Second guess the Russians one last fatal time for the human race. It's tough stuff, but folks, if you hide your head in the sand when your house is on fire, your house is going to burn down. So pull your head out of the sand and put it out, you know. So, I've often, it's scary what I say and controversial. Art Bell used to struggle with it all the time I was with him, but Art Bell believed in free speech. And but at least he openly, had his catharsis with me on his show. He was out there. Yeah, that's his freedom to do. I admired it, and I shot it down oftenly, but I admired him for doing that, admitting that you scare me. I got these really dark people in the government that really don't want you on the show anymore, and they said, "Don't let that guy on." That was going on all the way back in the 90s, and um, so I called one of the two producers. Is Tom Danheiser, who does the booth and oversees the show, and then there's also Lisa Lyon, who is kind of the person who is the person you go through to be on the show. And for 20 years, uh, same crew. All of my things, I do 3 to 4, even sometimes 5 shows a year. So everybody at Coast are expecting me to show up every 3 months, 3 to 4 months, because I have for decades. So I'm telling her, I really got to talk about these things that are important. And because we were doing ever since 2014, in fact, she hasn't even changed the text yet. It's still the same text from 2014. I try to do new ones, but it always ends up being the same for when you want to look at what's on, what's the next show is coming. You'll see it now. It's not been pulled off yet. That John Hogue does his prophetic warnings, because back when 2014, the coup where the fascists took over Ukraine and they started to get ready to ethnically cleanse all the Russians, and then that ended up in this civil war. That was when I've been watching all my career with Nostradamus. I was watching very carefully any sign that would show that the prophecies of the eagle kings of the north, the great brothers, the great eagle kings of the north, would be engaged. That would require the two big powers that are northern powers are America, Alaska at the poles, and Russia with all of Siberia and all of that. So he's talking about polar powers up north. Well, we're one of them, and so is Russia. It's possible that he misread Canada as being part of it, because we had all our radar stations and stuff up in Canada as well. So he might have seen that as well. Um, that's a possibility. Anyway, the North, the reason why they're called Eagle Kings of the North, the Aquilonea, by Nostradamus, is he's using animal totems. That's what I figured was going on here. I mean, if it was the eagle versus the red star, or the eagle versus the sickle, That would have meant Soviet Union was still around. The Soviet Union collapsed, and the Russian Federation rose out of it. And it is not the Soviet Union, and it has a totem of a two-headed eagle for the presidential seal. You know, Nostradamus would just call people kings. He didn't try to figure out why we call people presidents. It's like he looks like a king. And so he's talking and writing these things in the mid 1550s, 4.7 centuries ago. And he's so there will be two eagle kings that will have totems of eagles. What is the totem on the presidential seal when you see the president speaking on the podium? A bald eagle. What do you see when the Russian president is speaking at a podium? The two-headed eagle of Russia. Indeed, the Russian president has his own flag. The tricolor of Russia is just empty of anything on except the tricolor. But when the president is in town, it has a golden double-headed eagle on it. It's to show that that eagle king is in town. So these, I wanted to go through and detail these prophecies, but I got this answer from Lisa Lyon. She said, "Oh, we don't want to talk about Ukraine. We don't want to talk about the dangers of World War III and all that. It's too scary." And you know, and saying my role is a warner. That you know, that's what I've been doing for 30 years on Coast. I'm trying to make people aware. So this is exactly the red meat that we should be talking about. If you're afraid, it's if you're going to feed fear or try to pretend your house is not potentially on fire, you're not doing a service to humanity or yourself. You're not helping people. Like I said, it's sometimes necessary to get scared. And if you get scared, like we did in the Cuban Missile Crisis, I think right now we need to get a little scared about the new missile crisis in Ukraine that could happen. Because this time, there aren't rational people on both sides of this conflict, of this potential conflict. One side has gone gaga, and it's the West. We're alive because the Chinese and Russians are not being provoked as much as they can. And that's being viewed by these crazy people in our governments as weakness. So it's a very dumb move. It's like a kid with nukes. Oh, well, just keep poking, just keep poking. Well, there's going to come time when the bear's going to bite your head. And it will happen if you keep provoking him. So I wanted to talk to 20 million some people in all across North America on 650 radio stations of Premier, across the Caribbean, Armed Forces Radio, and on internet all over the world. So it's a big audience. Not my biggest audience, actually. My biggest audiences have been 150 million people, 64 million people in Russia, and 54 million people in Russia. CNN, when I was live on CNN International doing Europe and Africa, they said it was 1 billion. I thought they were inflating it, but it could have been 500 million watching it at prime time. With Charlotte Church, I think was actually one of my favorite anchors before CNN went south. Um, and it was on Nostradamus's 500th anniversary of his birthday. So it was around around the 23rd in Gregorian calendar of 2005. That was my biggest audience. So I've talked to hundreds of millions of people. I've talked to tens of millions of people in the United States. So it's a potential. I mean, one of the best things I think that happened in my life as someone trying to bridge a warning to the future that's positive is that I spoke to eventually on 4 shows that I did from 2017 to 2019 in Russia at the New Year's, doing New Year's predictions. I ended up doing all their major networks. Channel 1, that was the biggest with 64 million. That's when I talked about Edgar Casey's prophecies and how that Russia had something it was going to do long after Bolshevism was gone. He said this, Casey, in 1944. He started saying in 1932, 36, and 44. There were 3 entries of this. I'm, and I presented them to the Russian people and saying, now it's up to you to define what that hope is. I said to the Russian people. And I said it years before we were, but the 2020s were starting. I said, I fear that there's going to be the danger of a world war. And you're the hope of the world that it doesn't blow up. I said that. And and even today, I'm seeing when I'm looking at people talking on Russian TV and stuff, I'm noticing, wow, they're still talking about Edgar Casey. And so, I didn't plan it. It just, I do what I do. I just did Edgar Casey's prophecy a great service, I guess. I turned on Russia to it. I mean, as soon as that first documentary, 2-hour documentary came out, all of my books that were dormant in Russian language all became published again. So that's a very good sign. That means I really had an impact because Russians love books. They're very literate. They know their history. They know everybody else's history too. We don't know shit about our history. But anyway, the so so I didn't, it wasn't a desire, it wasn't an intention, but I have to acknowledge the fact that I managed to reach a whole lot of Russians. And now they're now responsible to do something very hopeful and to find out what that hopeful thing is that stops the destruction of the world in a nuclear war. And I think their restraint is showing that if they were acting like us, we would have had World War III in 2014. We're all alive because they have restraint, but our side sees that as weakness, and they're pushing the edge. And I think when that's what makes October potentially a Cuban Missile Crisis magnitudes beyond what 1962 was. So I wanted to talk about that. And I also I wanted to spend the 2 hours pretty much talking about that I'm on. And I set up a way that George and I could look at the different ways we go and look at this. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about the presidential elections, but just a little hint of what's coming because my official prediction is going to be in October. I am working on a Hogue Prophecy special report that will look at the world issues from September through October, November. I'm working on it now. But in October, I will publish just before the elections my final predictions. And it's kind of a big thing that happens in my life every 4 years since 1968, because I've been making these predictions since Nixon defeated Humphrey, as I predicted, and by the margin very, very slim. So I came to be tuning into people and what they're going to vote for. I don't know how it works. It's just like, don't ask the millipede how to walk. If he starts thinking about it, it falls over. It just happens that way. And I set it down and the accuracy is there. But I have picked the popular vote, and by what margin, all 14 elections in a row since 1968. Now, I had to change the prediction for 2020, but it was an accurate prediction in a change. I was early on saying this election will be a fraud. There will be more people voting than are actually registered to vote by the tens of millions. I don't know how I do this, but I know who really voted was legally voting. And it would have been Trump again by Electoral College. Now, if I heard that, I'd be out there like you saying, oh, come on. But there's a context here. I've had this phenomenon proven before. Go back to the year 2000 and the Florida recount. I predicted that Al Gore won, and if the recount happened, he would be proven to have won the election by a very tight margin over George W. Bush. Now, everyone's going, oh, yeah, what are you talking about? You just want Gore to win. No, I didn't. But, I also made predictions. One of my best predictions in my career so far is I made predictions about the two, what their presidencies would be like. If Gore had won, what his presidency would be like. Well, I don't need to talk about that one because he did win, but I'm getting to that, but he did not actually serve. But Bush, I ended up saying to Ian Punnett on Coast to Coast, I think it was on his weekend show, Ian has since passed just recently. He's a very good um, Coast weekend host. And it was mid-November, and they were still going about the recount. It was going to the Supreme Court and back and all. And I basically made this prediction. It's taped, documented. I basically said, and halfway through George W. Bush's term, there's some terrorist act will be blamed on Iraq, and America will, in the mid part of his term, will go easily into Iraq and depose Saddam Hussein and then get themselves caught in a quagmire. Rather than, it's a karmic echo to Vietnam. It's a karmic echo to Diem being killed by the US and then America being pulled. He was the president of South Vietnam. And he was pulled into the Vietnamese Civil War, the United States. And it became a quagmire in a jungle. The thing about karmic echoes is they come back in a reverse image, like looking through the looking glass. And it's really uncanny how this happens. Imagine this. A Texan president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, has a Gulf of Tonkin incident that is actually proven false, but it's too late. America is sending ground troops into a full-scale war in the jungles of Vietnam. Fast forward to 2003. The Democrat Texan is replaced by a Republican Texan, George W. Bush, who erroneously believes in weapons of mass destruction being still hidden in Saddam Hussein's Iraq, which is false. Before proving it, America invades and suffers 8 years of a quagmire, not in the jungle, but in the quicksands of the Middle East. So it's in my writings, I have more time to talk about all these amazing patterns that keep coming back in reverse. And so in a way, if there's a karmic echo to the Cuban Missile Crisis, the echo is that this time it goes beyond, it goes to some shooting of some stuff, maybe some nuclear things too. But there's not a really rational head, but maybe fear of survival, maybe even the mediocrity like Biden or demented man, or if it's Kamala Harris, maybe fear of losing your life and everybody near and dear to you might be enough for these people to wimp out and not do what they think they're doing. And the other thing is that now it's the Russian who's Kennedy, not the American. Putin is as significant a world leader as Kennedy was. And now a lot of people are going, oh, come on. Well, this is the occupational hazard of being accurate in prophecy. You say things that are politically incorrect, things that make people say, that can't happen. And it's not that I believe it. I'm just the messenger. I don't sometimes most of the time I don't believe what I'm coming through me, but I've done this long enough to see that, well, I'm the messenger, so it doesn't mean people just automatically think that I want these things to happen. No. Um, so but that's happened to anybody that's been in this field that's accurate. And kill the messenger, be angry at the messenger, but all the best thing to do is just go, well, that's kind of weird, but I'll keep my eyes and ears open and we'll see what time and events do to be the judge of your prophecy. That's a rational way to look at it. And then if it's true, and if it's not true or partially true, we all learn from that. I learned from it too. Things change. That's why I document it. So I learn. And everyone else can see there's a record of it. So the worst thing that can happen, in my view, is a place where you go on a show and the times have changed. My controversial appearances is one of the longest lasting guests one of the top guests of Coast to Coast. I'm like the last one that has been this long with George Nervy and Coast, coming every 3 to 4 months. But when I ran into this wall of, well, can you censor yourself a little on this about this and that? We don't want to talk about that. Back in October, oh no, May, it was May of 2023. I was just like, wow, it's finally happening at Coast even. This intolerance for thinking out of the box if it's not the proper thing to say. Even in prophecy, we're trying to pretend it's going to be, oh no, it must be this. And there's a lot of people on that show, I contend, that just they say whatever they need to do to keep on that show. I mean, case in point, Ed Dames. Ed Dames is on. He's one of the oldies. He's one of him and Ed, me and Ed. But Ed Dames is famous, in my opinion, for being a remote viewer who somehow has the charisma to keep an audience believing in him and be consistently wrong all the time. I don't think he even has 20% accuracy, but he's amazing. He manages to keep going, but he's terrible at prophecy. He's a remote viewing, which is real, by the way. I do it. It happens to me is a better way to say it. I is out of the way when it happens. It's he's giving a bad name to remote viewing. It is real. But anyway, he's a character and he manages it. He has his following and George loves him and he comes on. He's one of the few from the early days that are still doing like me. Now, George is so anyway, I'm a bit chest fallen. I don't know what to say or do. I'm just watching myself feel that way. And then she says, well, and I'm just saying, look, this is important. This is important. Your life may depend on it and the lives of other people. It's an important message. And she said, well, I don't know what to do. Why don't you talk to George? On his email. Just email him at George at coasttocoastam.com. I went, okay. I hang up my landline because I do radio. I have a landline, which is better sound. And then it dawned on me. I said, I didn't say when I would talk to him. And then I felt this effortless message is let your silence talk for you. Let your absence. Let's test to see how valued you are by the people that watch Coast or listen to Coast. So I did. I plan not to call them again until they call me back or never. So 6 months pass. It's December. Suddenly, after that bad experience, here's Lisa Lyon again, out of the blue, going, hello, John. How you doing? George wants to have you on the show again. It's like she's like inordinately cheerful, which is a classic psychological. She remembers what happened before, the big buzzkill. And so now she's like, I've never heard her. So, hello, how you doing? And it's like, and so I'm going, okay. So I said, all right, I'll do the show on the 20th of December. And then I wrote a letter. And I said, I'll get back to you in a letter. I'm CCing it to George so that he reads it too. I said, I have a condition. Never ask me to self-censor again. Never. It's not how this works. It's not how I will work with it. I have a big no for that. Because, it's like saying, oh, what's coming through the Medium channel? Oh, well, if that comes in, don't say that. Doesn't work that way. It's just like when I almost got to speak before ARE in Virginia Beach with the Edgar Cayce Institute. And the person who was the go-between, he was sympathetic to me, so he knew what I would say. But I got the message from all the old ladies and men in ARE. They said, we'd love to we'll pay his way to come and lecture at our place. About the future of America and the world and the countries and all that. But please tell him not to talk about politics. You see what's missing here? What is the United States of America? It is a political construct. You know, don't ask a bird where the United States is. Birds don't see any borders anywhere. These are our political constructs. So they're saying, don't talk about politics. And I said, well, then I can't. You just tell them that what is America and all those countries' futures that you want me to talk about if they are not political issues. So you guys don't seem to know that, and so you're kind of tied me up. So no, I either come, then tell them I'm not coming. And so he said, I thought you'd say that. And he said, I agree with you. It's kind of a dumb, but he had to be the messenger. So I was going to beat up the messenger because I am one. I get it. Whatever the message is, if it's just mundane or not. Um, so, so I said, never self-censor me again. You know, when I give you the points, take them like you've been doing for 30 years. It's been a huge success. Why are you going to sit on success? And I also said, don't give the negative people. They're a minority in your fans. Don't give them some, you're giving them power. What about all the millions of people who love having me on the show? Why not give them empowerment? Don't be afraid. Trust me. I've done this a long time. I'm accurate. Maybe that's the problem. I'm not doing enough Ed names because I can't. But so it looked like it was all resolved. I did the show. We did the script. It was one of the best shows I've done with George. So at least I have that to feel good about if that is indeed my last show. So then what, guess what happened? Thought everything was okay. 9 months pass. Nothing. Not on the show. Ghosted. In that 9 month period, I started getting letters from people about 3 months into it because people were saying, hey, Hogue was on in December. He should be on sometime in early March. That's what happens. Boy, he's not there. And so suddenly at the end of March, I'm getting all these emails because it happens that um, my Hogue Prophecy Bulletin free newsletter is mostly consisting of people who listened to me over the decades on Coast, and then thousands of them got on the list. So I dawned on me, I said, so I'm getting letters from my own people that like my work and also are fans of Coast or were fans of Coast. And it just, and then suddenly I'm getting more and more of this. And so I wrote, this was in May. I wrote in May, let's do a show. I tested the waters. I said, let's do a show about what's going on. And then let's schedule for early July an important milestone for Coast, my 30th anniversary being on Coast to Coast. And George loves anniversary specials. So I say, hey, this pull a lot of people in. We'll talk about art. We'll talk about high points and low points. We'll talk about our experiences together. Because I used to do George's show in St. Louis years before he was do the same thing, a whole night stuff with him. So I knew George long before he ended up being the final replacement for Art Bell, and I was so overjoyed that he got the job. You know, I, we love each other. It's there, that's there, and it's not going to leave from me. I don't think it'll leave from him. But so I thought, well, that should stir some communication. Nothing. The emails were sent, they didn't bounce. Nothing. So, you know, uh, George might be an experienced host, and he certainly is. But I have as a guest an experience that he doesn't have. As I have been interviewed by thousands of hosts on 4 continents. So, you know, I've seen the patterns of things. Maybe a host who's only dealing with their own show might not see it. And the very most common and pathetic way that people end up not being told that they're not going to be on the show anymore is some cowardly thing where they just don't ask you back. You know, so I mean that's what the Strieber did to me. Uh, we were going fine, 2 shows a year, really great on Dreamland what we did. I hope they're archived because it shows exactly if you watch the shows. I mean, and Whitley was really into me. He was, and I love his works and all. I was friends with him. You know, Matt, he came here, into the Seattle area, and his wife and all, Anne, and so we were friends and colleagues, and actually more so than my frequent appearances with George. And the show was really great. It's a smaller crowd, but it was, I mean, he did really great shows. And so anyway, he used to do a thing where he'd do the New Year's broadcast, and I would make my predictions, and then he would test them in June and July, put my feet to the fire to see how accurate or not I was. And that was a great system. So we're looking at accuracy, both of us. We get right, we get wrong. And that show went really well. And then suddenly, with no hint of any problems, silence. And it was when I started to do, just hold that thought for that thing, come back to the other, when nothing came back for July, and July passed. And then when we're coming into September, around September 5th, I had this feeling. I'm getting all these letters, even more letters than ever before. Lots of feedback about the show, about how people are upset with it, and I wish that people like me would be there on the show, and why are they leaving? And a lot of people saying I sub dropped my subscription, or I'm about to. And so I'm thinking, this is this cross section of 15,000 people. And just dawned on me. I said, you know what? I'm going to have to do a people power thing here. I'm going to have to do something demographic, or democratic rather than demographic. Um, it just dawned on me. So I sat down, and to my bulletin, I wrote an open letter to explain a lot of things that I'm explaining to you here on this show tonight. And this is the first show I've talked on media about this. And I thought, I want to get the feedback from these people, and I want to kind of say, if you want me back, I love getting your letters, but it's not going to get me back. Start writing to George, to Tom Tannheiser, and to Lisa Lyons. And so I gave them all three of their links, which are they want. It's on their feedback contact page. Nothing wrong or suspicious about or mean about it. It's like their open door is there. So go through the door, folks. Go through the cyberspace door and share how much you're sharing here with me, how much you want me back, and why. Really beautiful things people have been saying. It's been a tough week, but it's also been a really beautiful week to see how much it's nice to know that you're reaching people. And so and I wrote all back to almost all of them. So I might even keep these, in because of some of the insights that came up from both sides. So anyway, I um on the 5th of September, George and Lisa and Tom getting an avalanche of letters. And then a few days after, nobody seemed to get an answer from George, but one person that came back to me. And she said, "Well, I got an answer from George," and it was definitely his his email. And it was 4 words without a period. He's just been on. I went, really? I mean, it frazzled me so much that I went back and looked at all the shows on his website, coasttocoastam.com, to just see if maybe I missed something. Maybe it happens on rare occasions, and to make sure. And I only went back to December 20th. So just just being 9 months and 2 weeks, I don't know. That's a little strange. So then a few days after that, Lisa Lyon emails me again, says, George wants you on the show. So can you set up the 15 talking points for us? Yeah, of course. That's what I do. I write the script. And so so I sent it. It was a little late, so I wrote her again on Thursday, said it's going to be Friday because I've got other things. Like I've got this interesting potential for a documentary coming up that has to be filmed before the election. So it's a bit of a, I can't talk about it, but there was a lot of stuff going on with that. So um, anyway, so I sent my things, and of course, what I sent was there were follow-up questions, but the main thrust were the first two questions. And I even wrote bullet notes underneath each of these, which I did before on the 20th of December, which really worked. And it was really some very inspiring writing, which will appear in my September special. It just was like I was channeling something big, and it was the writing was eloquent and really something. As it's just really coming through me. And um, so I sent that, and I got a letter back from her that where she started in so many words. I won't, for privacy's sake, in so many words. Here we are back again, another trick, another maneuver to make me self-censor. They didn't want these first two questions to be multiple questions. They just want, and the way it felt, the way she was writing it, she's like, oh, we don't, it's almost like, I just felt it in her words and energy. It was like, no, no, and so I can imagine these would be very short questions that wouldn't even be a minute of exposure out of the 2 hours. I just know that because I've been a long season guest of Coast. So hot potato. Okay, now let's talk about space aliens. Let's talk about the future of Sasquatch. Yeah. Yeah. And so I wrote a letter back. And then after I sent it to her Friday at 3, I also then did a follow-up because everybody was celebrating when it sounded like I was going to be back. I had this flood of people. They were so happy. Everybody was writing, and well, we did it, and we were going to get it. Of course, I was a little okay, we'll see. I'm glad for us this moment. We'll see if what happens. And we have a date. It's going to be on the 19th. Okay, it's the first 2 hours. Wonderful, wonderful. And then and then so I wrote this letter and I posted it to the open letter so everybody could see it. And I said, we've had a setback. It looks like they found another way to sneak in this censor yourself, please, Mr. Hogue, indirectly, but it's a little even trickier than before. And it wasn't direct, like, no, we don't want it. It was like, so I mean, so I get the feeling from this, unless they can clarify otherwise, that whenever it seems like I make something, when we resolve something, it's not resolved. They're just going to find another way to control the situation, and so that's never happened before for me in Coast. So I wrote to everybody, and of course they all wrote back, stop censoring, John. No, what are you doing? Now here's the thing. Tomorrow we're doing this on Wednesday. We're doing this on Sunday evening, and so it's taped Sunday evening, and late in the East Coast, not so late in my area. So tomorrow there's a possibility that she might have left the office early and she has not come back. I mean, I can't imagine with what I said, because I basically said, look, this is another form of the very thing I warned you never to do again. And I said, I'm going to do these questions. These are the questions that are offered. These are the questions I'm going to do. And if you say no to that, I will never do Coast to Coast again. So I'm putting it on the line. Because it's just, that's it. Everything has an end. I'm still trying to work for a beginning, a new beginning, but I can accept it. I will walk away from this. I have the power to do it. I've had a long run, so it's good. Now, some of the people are writing, they're thinking, oh, it's like, well, try to compromise a little bit. Oh, and there's kind of they're not aware that I have other options. I have I have other outlets and they're growing. So I may even be soon a regular guest on one of the people um, that George fired on the weekend. Is now doing really well it looks like a really great thing. So I'm in the process of negotiating my first interview with with the guy named John Wells, I think, John F. Wells. And his show is called Caravan to Midnight, and it looks really great. He has an amazing voice. I said, I've heard that voice, deep, deep voice. And then I read his resume and I went, oh my God, he's an award-winning voiceover artist. So he does, this is ESPN. And also, yeah, I've heard him all over the place. I have a real good memory of voices. Uh, so anyway, that's in process. I got a really good feeling about working with him. I think because it's a lot like Coast, only without this problems. At least that's my feeling. We'll find out. He'll find out about me too. We'll see. So long story short, I have lots of options that are coming. When a void is created, it is filled by other things. So I don't want to say anybody's on this show, or as well as the people I've already been talking to, or my fans. Uh, Coast is, I'm not backing out of a career into silence. I'm leaving what seems to be a dying show. I wanted to stay on the HMS Coast to Coast AM after it hit its iceberg of censorship because it's the last foothold I have in the legacy media. Otherwise, I'm totally moved to the alternative free speech media. Um, I did it out of love of George. But if they kick me off the sinking ship, well, I guess this rat's going to get off in time. Hopefully they're not going to call it. So, if I'm the rat, okay, I'm a high dry rat. So, because the show is dying, I hate to say it, but it is. Everything has its life cycle, and I think this show, I would be surprised if it's still going on in 12 months, if we're all here. But so so in all these letters that I had, I actually, it's amazing. I suddenly had all kinds of doors opening up. Like it looks like I'm very excited it may have, but my readers will like it too. I may have a really good editor that's going to do work with me. And that opened up. The other thing that opened up is I finally found out why Whitley Strieber's quiet. One of the people who are in my Hogue Prophecy Bulletin and a Coast fan, it was also a Dreamland subscriber. And he told me that actually, Whitley went very public with it. He said, I don't like John Hogue's stance on Ukraine. Well, I understand that. But given he was all about feet at the fire, you know, what about Whitley? We put your feet at the fire to see what is my stance is not a stance. My observations are predictions that are coming true. I don't want to see Ukraine destroyed either. I'm part Ukrainian as much as I'm part Russian. A lot of my gene pool is from Ukraine, Jewish Ukrainians, and Russians. I got the whole Slavic thing going on here. So I don't want to see Slavs killing Slavs. And if I, I am on the side of Russia winning this because it's right, because there's fascists running Ukraine. And you can't negotiate with fascists. You can only defeat them, just like Hitler. You think you would make a peace treaty with Hitler or Mussolini and not end World War II in the proper way where these people are defeated? And then they sue for terms unconditional. Well, when you have fascists returning to Europe, now in Ukraine, the same fascists that were the Banderite fascists that were the best allies Hitler had in the occupation of Russia. If you're going to do that, if you're going to do that, um, we're seeing a repeat again of the same thing. You don't negotiate with fascists because they'll never come to the table and they'll never tell the truth because their whole idea is do whatever they can to defeat you. So unfortunately, some things can only be ended by a military decision. That's what happened in all the long years of struggle with the slavery issue that we had in the United States. All sides tried to sort that out. They tried every option until there was only one on the battlefield. And when the Confederate States lost, Lee, who was commanding the best general they had, he saw this too, that it had to be resolved by blood and fire. And when he lost, he said, well, God's will. We lost. Let us return and be Americans again. And Lee was a very important figure in healing and guiding the Confederacy to come back. You know, we tried to break away, we lost. So let's go back and be Americans. So a very great man. And I love to see a movie or something done that kind of shows Lee after the war, his last 6 years of life. There was a situation in a Richmond church, and he was now in civilian clothes. It was the end of the war, and a a rightfully a people would come up to the main bar and pray and at the front of the church, and but it was segregated. So a black man was bold enough to say, well, why can't I be here right in the best part like everybody else? So he came up to the bar and was praying. And people were like, oh. Robert E. Lee got up. He also had prayers and he was right beside him and prayed. Like, let's be Christians now. This is how it is now. Actually, Lee was against the slavery thing. He said the worst thing we ever did was support the slavery. If we had released the slaves, we would win this war. You know? So these I write about a lot of these parts of history that don't get mentioned a lot. I write in my articles, so as context. So here's the situation. So I would love to debate and get back with Whitley and debate this issue. My stance. Is it my stance or is it the reality? Put my feet under over the fire. Don't ghost. Whitley, if you can go out there and deal with unknown paranormal extraterrestrial stuff like you have said, how can you be afraid of me when you're dealing with the grays? And I think he really is. You know, I'm nothing compared to them because I've read your books, you know. So come on, the big hairy bearded man is not that threatening, you know. Just let's have this. So I'm going to put it out. And so that's now in the ethers. Now, here's the situation. I have to wait for tomorrow morning and see if what Lisa says, if anything. Now, there's a couple scenarios that could happen. I hope she says something like, you're fired, something like that, and then I'll share it with everybody and move on. But this kind of passive aggressive stuff that I contend I'm getting from them, I wouldn't be surprised if I don't hear anything until I have to wait at the phone for the ring on Thursday night at 10 o'clock Pacific time. Because they ring just before. And then I just listen to the do 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 and it starts it, and George does his opening and all that. So that could happen too. Just hold me on tenterhooks, see if I'll crack, see if I'll go, okay, I'll compromise my truth for you. It's so important. Well, I'll just keep trying to get back to writing these new specials and not let it distract me so much, and just go deep into those for the next few days, and then we'll see. Or I'll find out tomorrow. And I have some ideas about what I may do and say if I'm on the show, I will keep that a surprise. It's even a surprise to me. I don't really know what I'm going to do or say. So, but I'm sure it's going to be, if it happens, it's going to be historic and a lot of people will be talking about it. Many options possible. So that's all I have to say about that. This issue I'm having with Coast to Coast AM. But you on this show have gotten a taste of some of the things I was going to talk about. So if I don't get a chance to talk about it, I mean, that's why I'm on with Paul, because I love alternative media. I love the fact that I see what is killing Coast to Coast. This is important. This is a structural issue, which is really, this is literally the hole in the HMS Coast to Coast AM's hull, the iceberg moment. Art Bell fought like a tiger for the 10 years he was on the show with the suits and Premier Radio to not increase ads, to not take minutes off the guests talking. He said, if you don't have 25 minutes of talk with the guests and only 5 minutes of ads, if you go more than ads than that, it breaks the rhythm and it'll kill the show. So he fought, they threatened to fire him and all, no. And he was too successful. They had to listen to him, and they were a success, a rising show, a big show. Biggest night show in America. You don't kill the goose, don't break something that isn't broken. And you'll get your money, because we used to do lots of longer shows. I used to do 4 hours, we'd end up, we'd go till like 2 a.m. I'd start at 10 and it'd be over at 2. And it's funny how that got changed too. Somehow they were afraid, like, people aren't going to go deep with a guest for 4 hours. God, I do it with you every 2 weeks, and it's like, it's not fast. It's wonderful. You really go deep. And Art and I, when we got into that third hour, into the fourth hour from 1 to 2, magic happened. You're a little buzzed. You're not even up too late. And really interesting people, like truck driver. This is a smoky sounding, gravelly voiced woman who's a grizzled trucker. And she'd say, hey, Art. It's like, how are you doing? And so, I'm a truck driver. Oh, well, then blow your horn. He'd always say, blow your horn. And hear this, whoa. So she is a truck driver. So he said, blow your horn then, and so anyway, she talked to us and we talked a while, and then she says, you two guys have the sexiest voice on midnight radio, or something like that. And so we laughed, and Art then, well, thank you very much. I said, thank you very much. So you're the sexiest voice guys on night radio.
Well,
So
this is an important feature, I think, that Americans have lost,
yeah,
and that is that there is the graveyard shift.
yeah,
There is this activity in America across the country that, even though they're distant, they are connected in a way through radio.
yeah,
All right. I remember the long nights in automotive in the factory, and we would be listening late night. And at that time, it was actually Howard Stern.
yeah.
Now, back in
It
the
was
late
big.
80s, early 90s, and he
Radio.
was, it wasn't Sirius Radio, or he was
Yeah,
just on the radio show, and
it's lots of
and
fun.
just that late night talk kind of thing.
Yeah,
That was, people needed that to get
yeah.
through the night, you know?
Absolutely. And there
And
were lots of people. Oh,
yeah, yeah, oh
we
yeah,
got the graveyard shift. That was what made Coast great. And it
yeah,
was like one guest. So you
yeah.
get all
You
the
just,
people that go to bed early, and then the witching hour passes, and it gets really kind of funny. And Art was, he had this wonderful way of using O and saying volumes when somebody I'd say something out there or somebody else. He used to like go, oh, oh, oh. He had more O's, but you just immediately knew what he was feeling and thinking. And yeah, I mean, and I'm glad that I experienced being a popular midnight radio guest. I mean, after graveyard ship radio guest, it really that was really a wonderful experience, and I take that with me, even as it seems the ship is sinking. You know, it's sinking because they're not following the things that made them successful. They started when finally Art was gone and the new management, I don't know, I'm not blaming anybody, but the reality was, I would say that the pressure was harder on George because the legacy media is dying too. It's it's a mess, and the amounts of people that are leaving even major networks to listen to alternative media is huge. That's why they want to shut down X,
Mhm.
because it's like another kind. It's not a midnight shift or a graveyard shift. It's a freedom shift. It's like, and it has this terrible stuff in it. It's messy, but let me censor it, not the state, and it's not in our Constitution to do that. That's what makes America truly great and unique in the world is our First Amendment and a free press, which we've lost. Um, yeah, and I've got to say this. I was going to say it on the show when I was going to give some hints about where the election's going. And the my official was not now, but I was going to look at some interesting developments. One, um, and long story short, I'm seeing indications uh, in polls that really matter. I've done this a long time, and there's a lot of polls that are all like, whoa, they're completely politicized. And this is one of the worst elections for that. I mean, here's a woman who hasn't even won an election. Suddenly, she's now the candidate to be president because of a coup that took the man who actually did win the 82 million votes, including a lot of people who came out of their graves to vote in their thousands, and a lot of people who seem to have the same signature spelled differently over thousands of ballots, you know. And in the end, a whole lot of magical people who we can't find because they're not registered by the tens of millions voted in 2020 election. So, um, and frankly, all sides should want to see. I mean, I don't know if I said this earlier, but I did get a chance to prove that the vote in 2000 was right, that Al Gore won. Because a year later, see, these votes aren't thrown away, they're stored because of legal issues and stuff. So they're stored somewhere. So all these votes in all the 50 states are stored uh, of 2020. We can count them. We can see if the signatures match, if they're legal. We can literally find out if that election was legit. And I think any American, whatever your political persuasion, because if you won, then there's always a stigma. It's like, yeah, you won, you're a great batter, but we never got to check if you had a little rubber in the middle of your bat or that you're taking too much dope or something to make you superhuman. So it cheapens the whole process. Democrats should be just as interested. And if they really won, don't censor people and shut them down because that shows that you've got a problem. It's like, no, we don't want you to go in and look. If there was no problems, it's simple human nature. If that nothing had happened except it always happens a little bit of shenanigans, but nothing that changes the election, then all these different states should say, sure, come on in. We don't have anything to hide. Come on in. Let's see. And so they know either indirectly that these ballots that they did, balloting through mail, probably was completely screwed up. And so they're hiding that, or they're literally hiding treason. So otherwise, why shut up people and even put people in jail and you can't talk about it? That's Nazism, folks. No, you're not going to talk about the final solution. So so anyway, so they counted in the capital of the state of Florida. They counted because what had happened is Al Gore, he choked. He really had a case. You know, when they said, "Oh, it's all," somebody must have talked to him and say, "Just go with it." Now that shows he would have been a weak president. He said, "No, I won this, and I don't care. People are going to have who they voted for. That's more important than you promise me this or that if I self-censor." Um, so what happened is it went to the Supreme Court, but I finally found out why they voted no for it. It wasn't that the case wasn't germane, but they said you haven't given us options of how you're going to count these votes, and we got to be sure these options are fair. So they kicked it back to the state Supreme Court, and Al Gore was going down there to set up the four options. And if that had happened, rather than him just bugging out, it would have, I think, been sent back up to the Supreme Court and they would have approved it, which they should because it's federal issue, federal election of the president. It is in their domain to decide, but then they would have had the options. And I think they would have said, okay, start the count according to and count all of them through these four options. So with that in mind, a bunch of people who got money together and went into the thing, and with help and with people watching, they counted all those dangling chads. And they counted it, and Al Gore won in all four options. There was like 20 votes here, 50, 30 there, kind of. And by the end, the one that was the big one was his biggest margin was 75 votes. He won. Now that vindicated my intuition. I would love to test to see if 2020, if you really took out all the dead people who voted and all the illegals who voted and all the ballots without names that were cast as legal, etc., etc. If you weeded all of that out, I think I've tuned in right. I think Trump would have won a second term like he won the first through the Electoral College. Now, I've already talked about this in this situation because Bobby Kennedy, I was talking last year around October last year when he came in. I saw this thing of him because Trump was actually trying to get him over, and I thought he might end up being Trump's vice president. And then he'd become president maybe after Trump. So I wrote about that in the Hogue Prophecy report as one scenario. That didn't happen, but Kennedy is part of his unity ticket. And he may have a very important part in his cabinet dealing with the sickness industrial complex and getting all this toxic food out. So that's in play. Variation on a theme, but it's essentially on track for something like that. So um, so I was going to talk a bit about that. The other thing I'm also seeing is when I watched the debate, I saw something very interesting. I saw the little things where you have the lines, the graph lines, like the guy's talking, you see the graph lines, and there's a red one for Trump, a blue one for Kemp, and there's a yellow one for the independents. So I watched all that with the pollsters, and I was amazed, and they were amazed. They'd never seen it before, and it's a really telling, important thing. It's what I call the soccer mom effect. There's two things that may bring the vote to Trump, and he might even win the popular as well as the electoral. So it's like a soccer mom event. Um, I don't know if it was Bush or something, but there was this demographic of soccer moms that got, well, whoever the candidate was, I can't remember right now, into the election. Well, there's two soccer mom effects. This is the first. When it first started, they started with a classic where partisan thing. You have the clickers. If you're in the audience, you're all these people and they're clicking, and then the lines move up or down. So if you're a Democrat and he's talking against abortion, so they started with abortion, and then suddenly they're clicking negative. It's like going boo like that. It's a very steep curve, and the reds are going like this, and the yellows and the independents are kind of hanging a bit, but they're a positive, but not as much. But every other one they showed, with all the other things that happened on that debate, the yellow line and the red line were like this. The independents, the largest block of voters, the independents were like this, and sometimes they went higher than the red as positive, positive, positive. And the thing that they didn't mention in this thing that I saw, I said, the real scary one for Kamala Harris's crew is that rather than go deep down when the independents, the other guys were going up, the blue line just dipped a little, just a little under, a little shallow valley. And that means there's people that are not so certain they want to vote for Kamala. And so that's the first thing. That's the independents or the soccer moms. And in that blue dip, there's indications that the soccer moms in this are men. Men don't want to vote for her. And especially because of the way she acted during the too prepped, too all those. That was a real dumb thing where they had her constantly looking and going, oh, 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 they should not have had her on camera. They should just have had the one and the other, because she was just going smarmy and she was doing a lot of things. And then, this is important in predicting presidents. It's a shame, but, a look, a sound, these things that really shouldn't matter. It's like they shouldn't matter, but that's what people do. They make their decisions on things as simple as a smile, a voice, a gesture. For instance, President Richard Nixon won 3 of the 4 debates with John F. Kennedy in 1960. They were the last 3, but he made the mistake of not coming on the first one. Everybody was looking at him. He didn't put any makeup on. Kennedy was perfectly made up so that he really looked suntan and vital, and it just brought out that side of him that, well, his body language says, I can be your president. And then Nixon, who had just come out of the limousine to get there, he's in excruciating pain. He had an infected knee, and he jammed his knee into the driving door and opened it up, and he was in excruciating pain. So he's got that. So he's sweating, and because he has no makeup, he looks like a dead body. But he got his stuff together. And I watched the other interviews, and Kennedy got eviscerated by Nixon. No more. But that look on that visceral thing made people vote for Kennedy over Nixon. And I'm telling the Democrat people, if you've got to that, there's nothing as a man. There's nothing that turns off a man more than a lot of that wiggling and you know and that Marge Simpson voice. Well, here I am, I'm Marge Simpson. I want to be your president. And she cackled once, which is that cackle is really. I know it's bad, but it is what people do. It's how men react. And the men are leaving the Democratic camp, what they may not vote, or they may vote for Trump. That little shallow valley makes me think that we might have some shocking surprises that might even be enough to counterbalance. The other thing is, I'm hearing, I don't know yet, so these are all trends. I'm not going to make my final prediction until end of October, but I'm seeing trends that they're having a hard time cat herding all the people that they let in illegally. to go out and vote. They're not calculating. What's wrong is that they just don't understand what people who are given a free pass to get into the country in a bit of a shady way. What do? They disappear. They're not going to they're not going to come and vote. If there are police there, they might be arrested. So a lot of people may not go, not enough. And so they're having a hard time cat herding the people that are illegally in and rushing them with a driver's license so they can pretend that they're citizens and vote. And there's even some areas, like in New York State, where they're being allowed to vote. They're not legally here. You know, a republic is based on laws and legality, res publica. It means that, I mean, our laws may be more democratic leaning than other countries, but you have to have law and order to have a society that works. You have to actually swear an oath to the Constitution that you mean it and you actually serve the Constitution and its rights that are in there for all of us. But there are people now that are in power. Once they get in power, they just ignore the Constitution. Look at COVID. Look at the shutdowns. That was Fourth Amendment. There was all kinds of things, but they don't care. It's like when I had disaster with my first publisher. Fortunately, I mean, I he got my foot through the door with an international bestseller, but he embezzled $500,000 of my royalties. So big lesson. And the lesson was I took the contract to a good lawyer, and it was all good. And he looked at it, and he was looking kind of sad, like he'd seen this story before. And he said to me, he was a beautiful guy. He just said, "Well, yeah, this is all." It was hardcore. This is all good. It's all right and proper. But remember, a contract is only as good as the honor of the men who write it. And I got the message, it's like, because I was thinking, I'm in trouble. You can have the best constitution in the world, but if the people don't know what it is because they're illiterate, because they have lost their civics classes for a couple of generations on purpose so that you don't know your rights, and you're kind of programmed not to even concern that problem until you lose them, and you could in this election, then you have to fight for them again and do what our founding fathers and mothers did. And we as citizens have dropped the ball in our responsibility to know our rights, to make our voted candidates look over their shoulder at us. They don't. They're not afraid of us. We're afraid of them. They know it. So that's got to change. It's going to be a little tough few years here. And the other thing that I probably really would upset people on Coast with, if it happens, uh, I'm going to quote and come to Hogue Prophecy. You'll see the link from X, and I'm going to say one of the two candidates very clearly has made it a campaign promise that this candidate will close X, which is the biggest free speech area on cyberspace and internet online, that the opinion of this person that may be your president is that this person doesn't say it, but it's this thing that's coming around is free speech is a privilege, not a right. That's how this person will look at your freedoms if this person is president, and it's not Donald Trump. Kamala Harris. I'm speaking of Kamala Harris. So if you value your ability to have free speech rather than have it being a privilege, but a right as it should be, don't vote for her. You're not going to like that future at all. Welcome to the United Soviet States of America. We will go Stalinist. and then there'll have to be a revolution. You guys get to hear that. I don't know if they'll probably pull the plug on me before I get to say that, if they do that at all, if I do it at all. But these are the two things. This is the shorter one. And then the issue of the October missiles and stuff was the other. These are the two important things that I had to say. So, but I think there's a chance Trump will win. And I think, God, the shock will be worse than what happened in 2016. Well, by the way, I think if Kamala Harris is president, Hillary Clinton will be Secretary of State come president behind the scenes. Because actually she's Hillary's protege. Also Obama's, but a little leaning towards Clinton. So Hillary Clinton might finally be a backdoor president, as I've always been worried that she might be. So these are all potentials. How we all face them. If we face them in denial, if we face them with our head in the sand. I mean, I got to tell you, there's some things I do it too. I mean, when I look at some of the things that are developing, and I just want to go, it's just, you know, I mean, I love to write, but what if I can't write anymore? You know, things like that. So I've also had to struggle with this. Um, I have all these beautiful books and articles that I want to do, but can I do them in such a world when freedom of speech is a privilege that only the apparatchiks have a little bit of, not the people? I don't know. So I get it. I'm not Superman. I'm just like all the rest of you. Except that I just realize from long years of living and all that um, dangers have to be faced, not avoided. And I'll just end with a statement of what my teacher Osho used to say to us all the time. Never avoid, never avoid. If you feel something fearful, go into it. If you want to avoid, go right into it. If you don't, the fear follows. That's the only way to end fear. Face it. If you don't, it'll follow your whole life like a shadow. And I would add, you'll be living a shadow life that makes you very easily manipulated by tyranny. So I wish I could, say, our democracy's on fire. Got to put it out. Sometimes that happens in life. Life's disasters are part of life. Preventing disasters are part of life. You got to do that so we can bring ourselves back to freedom again, rather than become a fascist state. Remember what I said, what happens to fascist states. We don't want to become that because we'll go down the same way.
Mhm.
One way or another, it'll be the same. So, vote. I mean, Trump is a problem. I could go at lengths about it. I wrote a very accurate book about predicting his presidency and all, and he's got a lot of problems. He's also wide. So it's just so you all know, he's a wide open channel, easily manipulated, and almost got us into 3 wars in his myth of, oh, he didn't start a war. Well, he sure unconsciously tried 3 times. They had him coming and going. But some good news from my contacts that I read and stuff, like Robert Barnes, who's doing legal work with Trump and all. Very interesting guy. Learned a lot about legal things from him. Uh, some there he doesn't like to talk publicly about his mistakes, but Robert Kennedy is sharing them. He talks a lot to Robert about all the mistakes he made. And he's so privately, he and Robert's nice enough to tell us all. And I've even heard some conversations with him and Robert, like just after the assassination, he talked to Robert and actually, and the other thing I'm hearing is that Trump is always asking questions. He really asks good questions. He won't let it go until he gets like the full answers. So that's there. Um, the other thing I found out from a contact through Larry Johnson, former CIA guy, that he said on one of his shows that he had a guy he can't mention who was there when all those decisions to go to war almost 3 times happened. And the thing he took away from it is, my God, these men were badgering Trump. Trump kept saying, I don't want to do this. This doesn't feel right to me. So his channel was saying, I don't feel right about it. Why are we going to war here? And they were just on him, almost being abusive, the guy said, like, you got to do this, Mr. President. So I learned about that. I've heard some very interesting talk about this party, this cabinet of rivals that he wants to see. He wants to do what Lincoln did now. And also he's aware of the deep state and he's aware of how the neocons, he just got wrapped around their finger. That's what Bobby Kennedy is saying. So I don't see Kamala learning. I looked at her chart. When I wrote about her chart in 2020, I tried as hard to find something that well, maybe she'll mature when she's got power. Maybe the office will change her and she'll be a leader, but no, unfortunately. I wish that were true. She's a tool. She's a sock puppet. The deep state finally has found their perfect sock puppet, completely immoral, say anything. I mean, she goes in one day and she's talking finally to Netanyahu about all the Palestinians being murdered. Now it's 300,000 estimated now. And it could be, some people are saying, Ralph Nader is saying it could be 600,000 by the end of the year because now people are dying faster because there's less food and stuff. And it's a spiral. I mean, we're looking now as we don't, this thing started as well. There was 2.3 million. Well, now it's just 2 million Palestinians left. So this is a genocide going on. And so, she was making, well, I'm going to talk to Netanyahu. I'm going to tell him there's too much killing and all that happening. And I thought, well, good, Kamala, good, do it. That's hopeful. And then after that whole meeting happened, she's back on script. She will do and say anything to be in that job. And that's the perfect gal you want if you want to tie strings of the deep state upon her. I wish it weren't so. I'm sorry for women. This woman should not be the one that gets through the glass ceiling first. She didn't earn it. There's a lot of other women out there that earn it. She shouldn't be the one going through that glass ceiling because I tell you, girls, if we survive this, she's such a bad choice that maybe it'll be a generation before a woman gets a chance again. A real leader woman, a mother of the nation. I'd love that. That's kind of my views.
We'll have to end it there.
My
We've
God,
gone almost 2.5 hours or so.
my
But
God.
before we go, I want to remind the audience, please click the link that's in the description of this video. That'll take you to John's website, and you can sign up for his periodical, and you can also sign up for a reading. John, if you don't mind, just briefly just describe what a reading is and what your
Well,
periodical is.
it's about 90. Yeah, we'll do the reading first. It's roughly 90 minutes. And we start with the astrology as kind of the Kelly Blue Book. The birth chart is kind of telling you what your body, mind's potentials are. And then we go deeper into with the tarot, where we kind of touch the soul, touch the heart of thing, the being inside of you, and how it relates to the body, mind, vehicle, and all the rest of the world outside. And um, it's lots of fun. There's a lot of joy in these readings. Um, and it's not scary and stuff like that. It's a lot. Usually it's been really beautiful. And I seem to, now that I've come back to it after 26 years not doing it, I just read the world and just stopped suddenly. And then I came back, and what I discovered was now missing, and a good thing is there's no more reader in these readings. There's just the reading. You know, it's a subtle, I am the reader and you are the client, has gone. And, you know, I came to realize it in 2018 when I got back into this. The other thing is I'm always amazed how I'm on this camera all over the world, and all these equally beautifully unique people who come to do a reading with me seem to be in their own way on the path to truth in their unique ways. And they're kind of at a plateau where they need somebody who has the experience or may have been with a great master, who I definitely believe I have been, and have a little of that magic from him to help, as he taught me, to help. And so oftentimes I give meditation tools that are really tailored for the needs of a modern human person in a mind amplified world. Can't just sit down and do Vipassana watching your breath. That was easy in 500 BC, very simple times. We have too much going on to start from there. But there are techniques that can get you to the place that Vipassana gets you to, which I was taught by Osho. And so I can also give them and talk about them. And it's free. I mean, there is payment for the reading, but I just send all the links and instructions by an email. And not everybody needs it, but so it it's wonderful. Um, Most people come, almost everybody comes out of it really in a beautiful space. And I'm just a facilitator. I'm not reading, but something that my master initiated me into in 1987 in India. uh, I just get out of the way. I'm the mailman, and then the mail comes. So, and then I'm what as surprised as you are. You know, so I'd love to do that with you if you're into it. Right now, there's a lot of people wanting readings, and so, yeah, so if you're feeling like having a reading, it might be good to kind of jump in now, because it's getting towards the end of the year. A lot of people start wanting readings. And so I'd love to have a reading with you. Now, the other thing is that I have the Hogue Prophecy Report, and that usually comes out at the end and the beginning of each month. And like I'm saying, I have two big specials that I'm doing for these next 2 months. Uh, it's $60 to be involved. I send it as a PDF file with the Liquid app program so that you can blow up the words to see it on your phone, so that you don't have to look at little dinky words and move your phone around. So that's always at the front of it. And it's fully illustrated. I try to make it funny as much as I can, and wow, and this and that. If you join now, I'll give you my last um, one. A lot of the readers are saying it's the best one I've ever written, and some of the illustrations are pretty amazing too. That was my July into August Hogue Prophecy Report. You'll get that free if you subscribe. You also can get it by becoming an automatic payer, so that it just pays the $5 every month, or you can get it a one-time donation of $60. And you know, all the links are there at Paul's web page for these shows. And you can also find it at hogueprophecy.com, the links and free samples of what I write. So you can even check that out. And you know, this is the way I make my living. And you know, we are not run by corporations, we of the alternative media. And so our reader report, our fan support is how we make this happen. So if you can, uh, help us out. And and enjoy a very different take on the future and the world events.
So the audience, make sure you click that link in the description of this video and all the videos that I've done with John, and that will take you to his website so you can sign up for the periodical or do the reading. So John, thank you for doing another great episode. This was episode 20. And I just want to remind the audience, again, please don't be afraid to do, cancer screenings. My aunt passed away from colon cancer, metastasized colon cancer last week. And she didn't want to do those screenings. She reached a certain age and she thought that she didn't need to. And unfortunately, that's the reason why she contracted the metastasized cancer. So just take a lesson learned from what happened to my aunt, and please, make sure that you do your cancer screenings. So John, thank you again for being on the channel. And
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Paul, for this show, and thank all of you who watch us.
okay, very good. So John, you have to say goodbye to everybody before we end.
Bye to everybody. You too, and you, and you.
Okay. All right. Let me stop the recording here.